Hi there, and welcome to another edition of Resources Plugged In. It's a podcast that's at the intersection of mining and finance. And today we're lucky enough to have Rick Trotman, President and CEO of Barksdale Resources. Hey, Rick, how you doing today?
I'm great, Kieran. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thank you. You're a busy guy. You got a couple of drill rigs turning on your property, Barksdale, which is, I know that's been a fairly long time coming for you and really exciting for investors and shareholders. So I thought it would be a really great time to sort of get you on as you're now active and drilling away on a project I know you've been talking about for quite a while. So really appreciate your giving us a bit of your time. Maybe we could start off by getting to know you a little bit. For those of my viewers who don't know who you are, maybe if you don't mind talking about yourself a little bit. How'd you get involved in the business and what have you been up to the last few years?
Yeah. Happy to kind of dive in there. So I'm a geologist by background. So I've got a master's degree in economic geology and went to school in Reno, Nevada. And that's kind of like a big hub for different mining companies, or at least was back then. So I kind of signed on with Barrick after I got done with my master's. They were the folks that funded my master's thesis, actually. And so I worked out on the Carlin Trend looking for gold for them for short period of time. And then I moved on to Meridian Gold, who was based in Reno, and was able to go down to Mexico and work on a gold project called Mercedes that we actually took from 100,000 ounce type resource to over 1 million, and ultimately got it to the point where it was going to become a mine. That's when I kind of jumped out of the ship. There weren't a lot of gringos that were going to keep their jobs down at the mine, so to speak. And Yamana, who had bought Meridian at the time, didn't really ship gringos around the world to work in their Latin American operations. So anyway, I kind of made a shift career-wise into equity research at that point, went off to Connecticut, worked in equity research, ultimately started going in and out of New York City, Manhattan every day, worked at HSBC, and then kind of got annoyed at telling people what they should buy and not having them actually buy it. On the exploration front, there's lots of great ideas out there, right? There's people drilling constantly, lots of cool files that come across, and you tell fund managers about the successes, and they just don't pull the trigger. It's not very satisfying. So I went to work in private equity after that, and so I actually got to pull the trigger. It was a lot of fun. Put probably $300 or $400 million to work in the mining industry, focused mostly on exploration and earlier stage type things. Invested in dozens of different exploration companies. Took a couple of big gold development projects public, things like that. So kind of well-rounded here. I've got insights into different segments of the market. What's the old saying? I'm an inch deep and a mile wide. So, coming back full circle into corporate land, jumped out of private equity, went to Barksdale, where I've been for 5.5, coming on 6 years now. I'm able to use each one of those little individual tool sets to my advantage. So it's been an interesting ride.
Excellent. You spent a bit of time with Resource Capital Funds, didn't you? Is that the group that you're talking about?
That's the group. Yeah. So I was there for nearly 6 years. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, obviously very well-known group for what we do, critical to getting funding for, if they're in a project, it usually means it's going to be pretty good. So that's some good experience for you. And it looks like you got, the practical sort of boots on the ground, geological sort of experience, along with understanding a bit on the capital markets front, which it sounds like the exact type of background you need to be a successful CEO of an Explorco. So with that said, maybe we can kind of jump in. You mentioned Barksdale trades under BRO on the venture. Maybe you can provide a bit of an overview on the company and what it's all about.
Yeah, I guess this kind of dovetails into that whole RCF Barksdale thing. So I left RCF to come to Barksdale, and part of the reason that I did that was because I thought the Barksdale story was Pretty good. I mean, it was a project right next to something that was heating up and was quite fantastic. You know, the big exploration success at Arizona Mining. Um, I had a friend who was working at Arizona Mining. It was fantastic. He really enjoyed it. You know, he suggested that the exploration potential on the Sunnyside portion of the property was quite good. So it kind of checked my due diligence box, and ultimately pulled the trigger, came over here, and kind of jumped into the hot seat with regards to permitting. Right. So Sunnyside, the project that we have, it's got fantastic exploration potential, but ultimately the permitting became kind of the sticky wicket, as they would call it, right? The piece that really slowed us down, and it's just a bear to get projects through the U.S. Forest Service these days. And so it took us the better part of 4.5 years to get that through. Now, mind you, we
Wow.
had a couple of curveballs thrown into the mix. You know, we had the government shutdown under Trump for a couple of months. We had thrown in, there was just everything that could derailed us, right? So, not the typical. I couldn't measure our progress against other projects just because we had these extraordinary circumstances. But damn, yeah, it took a long time.
Well, congratulations. So now you've got some drill permits, and how long do these last, and how much can you drill with it?
Yeah, we can drill an unlimited amount effectively. We're limited by the number of drill pads ultimately, so we can have up to 30. But the nature of the drilling that we're undertaking, we can, with deep targets, you can hit things from a good distance away. So ultimately, we can drill an unlimited number of holes over 7 years effectively, and 7 years is a good amount of time to allow you to fully explore. It wouldn't give you enough time to fully, say, delineate a resource and drill it out on tight centers. But that's not the business that we're in.
Right.
We're looking to make big discovery, look to kind of make broad step outs to show continuity and what it could be, so to speak. Right. We're not looking to kind of spend money to look at what the characteristics could be on a production scenario, right? That's not our business. We're explorers, and we want to make discoveries and show people just how special something could be from a size and a quality perspective.
Could you give us a little bit of an overview on the Sunnyside project? I guess it's a polymetallic, and it's, I guess, located in a pretty strategic location.
Oh
You've got
yeah.
someone who, like you mentioned it before, Arizona Mining. I guess you're kind of immediately adjoining a project that's in development. So, yeah, would you mind giving a bit of an overview in terms of what Sunnyside's all about?
Yeah, so Sunnyside's the main project. It is part of this massive mineral system. So we have this mining district has a couple of different porphyry copper deposits in it, and so it's just kind of a prolific metal laden district. The interesting piece of this district are these style of deposits that are associated with porphyries called carbonate replacement deposits. They're either kind of skarns or manto systems, and the that piece of the system that we're searching for is massive. So on the adjoining property to us, the group formerly Arizona Mining, now South 32, they have one of the world's, if not the world's largest carbonate replacement deposit, and that is part of the system that we are kind of uh, we hold a position over, right? So if you think about it as, kind of a piece of scrap paper, so to speak, think of this as the deposit, and we have a property boundary like this, right? So we have a piece of something that is truly special, and now we have the permits that allow us to go in and actually figure out what it is that we have. Like, do we have a small piece of this thing? Do we have a medium, very large piece? And then ultimately, what's the quality of the piece that we do have? Is it, kind of average grade of what's next door? Are there portions that are much higher grade? These are all questions that just can't be answered until you have a drill, on the property, and you start getting the so-called truth machine turning and get some results out of it. So that's the phase that we're in right now. It's that show me phase. And
Right.
we've got two drill rigs turning right now to answer some of these questions, or at least start to give us some of the answers to these questions.
How many meters are you going to be drilling under this program?
Yeah, so for our option agreement, because we're earning into this project, we've got to drill 16,000 meters, so roughly 50,000 feet. And so that's the initial goal. Obviously, we'll keep drilling past that, but at that point, our joint venture partner has to start writing checks alongside of us. So the initial phase, so to speak, over the next year is going to be 16,000 meters, and then we'll kind of continue the drilling from there.
You mentioned you can drill some deeper holes. How many holes do you think you get out of 16,000 meters?
That's a great question. It just depends on how we tackle it, right? So we're drilling some holes that are, 5, 6, heck, we could drill a 7,000-foot hole if the mineralization, warrants it. It wouldn't take very many holes to kind of get to 50,000 feet or 16,000 meters. You could do that with probably 10 holes. But with the program that we have designed, we're looking to do wedging. And so that entails having kind of a mother hole, and then you do splays off of the mother hole. So kind of shorter drill holes that utilize the existing drill hole.
Color.
So that way you drill shorter holes and you get more pierce points into
Right.
a deposit or into a zone for the same buck, right?
Excellent.
So obviously we have to kind of execute on that program and see how it works from a cost and a time standpoint. But assuming that it works well, that's how we're going to execute that program. So rather than, 10 holes, we might be able to get 15, 20, 25 pierce points into the deposit executing that type of program.
Excellent. Well, some of the stuff going on right now is investors are starting to, become armchair quarterback, at-home geologists all over again. I've seen it a couple of times. Everybody becomes an expert at reading drill assays. So,
Oh yeah,
which
I
and again,
see it all the time.
and again, there's a lot more to it. But in terms of the drill assays you'd be looking for, are you looking for sort of like broad intervals of like high grade, or are you looking for narrow intervals of like high grade? What sort of things? What are you looking for? Broad intervals of lower grade? What types of what should investors kind of expect with the way that you're sort of drilling?
Yes. No. It's complicated, right? So obviously we'll take any mineralization because that mineralization, even if it's low grade, gives you a lot of information that allows you to then further kind of plan the next series of holes and get closer and closer to what you're really looking for, which are thick intervals of high grade mineralization. So that's always going to be the target. But if we hit a thin interval of high grade or a broad section of kind of modest grade, those are all great as well. So ultimately, we're always aiming for and trying to find and latch into that high grade, big mamma jamma, so to speak. But that's something that takes time to get into usually. The good thing is that we already have a historic hole that's in one of those types of zones, several kind of stacked zones.
Right.
And so, we've got a leg up. And so we can kind of do some step outs and kind of walk away from the known into the unknown, not just kind of drilling blindly into a system. Like a lot of kind of grassroots explorers have to start, in that position.
So in terms of Hermosa across the fence there with their CRD, I guess they've got a couple of deposits. They've got an oxide and a sulfide.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the Clark and the Taylor deposit. In terms of, I guess when they were Arizona mining, there would be probably a bunch of drilling data to sort of go off of. What do they tend to get with their drilling? Is it all over the map, or are they getting some broader intervals, or is it narrower? Just in terms of preparing and educating investors on what to expect, is there anything to sort of go on with what they've got?
Yeah, so if you look at the old Arizona information, it's still available on the internet, right? What you would see, you could think of it like a feather duvet, right? So these manto systems, they're kind of like big blankets, right? So they tend to be kind of these oblong deposits, and every once in a while, just like the feather duvet on your bed, they clump up, right? And so you get these thicker sections where the feathers are all kind of clumped together, and then you kind of go into this thinner kind of base around it, right? And so that's how these deposits tend to look. You can be in kind of a couple of meter horizon that, it's not something that you want to write home to mom about. But then you get into one of these big clumps, usually where a structure intersects the right type of rocks. And then you can have these big blowouts. And that's what really makes the Taylor deposit on the Hermosa project really special. And that's what we're obviously looking for, is more of those big clumps, if you will. And so we're looking for where, the right type of rock, which is shaped like a big blanket, is intersected by, some sort of structure where the fluid can move along that structure.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you. That's a great explanation of that. So, how did Barksdale ever get a hold of this project to sort of earn in or option? Was that sort of before your time? Do you know kind of the history of how it was able to identify and get a deal done?
Yeah, it was before my time, but from what I understand, the group of shareholders that kind of put Barksdale together and did the initial deal, I think they were at a dinner one time, and I forget exactly what conference, but as it happens, you end up getting a couple of drinks into the hands of geologists and financiers, and you start talking about all the different opportunities that are out there. What are the projects you worked on in the past that were good that you wish you had? And I think they were out with a geologist who, had some exposure to Sunnyside, and brought it up, and that kind of led to some initial digging, and that's how the introductions ultimately got made. Between Regal, our joint venture partner, and this group of kind of investors and financiers. And so, they, I want to say, worked on getting a deal done for 6, 8, 10 months, and then ultimately got done. I came on, probably 3 or 4 months after the initial deal was signed, and they raised some money. And so that's all before my time, so to speak. But yeah, I have heard some of the stories.
Excellent. In terms of the earn-in, what sort of percentage of the project will you earn into?
Yeah, so we have 51% right now. And so basically the first phase of the earn-in is to complete a work program and give some shares in cash. That'll cement our ownership at 51%. So it's basically we lose it if we don't complete these tasks. And then the second phase is another work commitment, more cash and shares to Regal, and then we'll get to 67.5%. And then after that, it's a fully paid earn-in. So we'll be responsible for 67.5% of the costs. Regal will be in charge of their portion of the costs. And if either party doesn't pay, then they get diluted.
Okay, excellent. Good
Yeah.
stuff. Thanks for going over that. So maybe going back to some of the technical stuff, because I know you're a geologist and I'm going to ask a silly question. That's what we like to do. So you're thinking you've got like a porphyry system, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
You think it could have been the sort of potential sort of heat source that could have deposited the metal on cell 32's side of the fence?
Yep.
Yeah, is that some of the thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. So think about it like a pot of rice on your stove here. You put the water in, you put the rice in, you put the pot lid on, and you start heating up that water. Eventually what happens is all of that water starts to build, steam and pressure. And as that pressure builds, ultimately it wants to escape. And so what it does is it looks for any weakness between the
Right.
lid and the pot, and it's going to exploit that weakness, and that's how it's going to escape. It's the same thing when you have a big porphyry kind of injecting itself, lava, magma for the folks at home that are armchair geologists. You have that magma column coming up into the rocks. It does the same thing. It heats up all of the rocks around it. All of those fluids start moving, and they tend to move away from the heat, convection cells, and they exploit planes of weakness. And so what we have at Sunnyside is this kind of shallow group of rocks. They're volcanic rocks. They're really tight. You can't get a lot of water through them. But underneath, so think of it like everything above this piece of paper is volcanic, and everything below it are carbonates. The carbonates, those are more porous. They also react to acidic fluids. So think about it like if you go on a rager and you drink a bunch of wine, what do you take at night? You take a Tums. A Tums is just ground up carbonate. that rock that
Right.
we're looking for, that's what you're doing, and it neutralizes the acid in your stomach. You can sleep. Well, in this type of a system, that acid neutralization kind of chemical reaction, it kind of dissolves away the carbonate, but it dumps out metal as part of that process. And so you build up these nice deposits in the carbonates close to that contact with the volcanics, because it's acting like a big fluid trap, because the fluid can't escape upward. So it goes out, and then it spreads out into planes of weaknesses within the carbonate. And so that's why, with the current idea is that the Sunnyside porphyry, think of it as like the palm on your hand, has these radiating carbonate replacement deposits coming out from it. We know that there's at least one, and that's the Taylor system. And there could be many more. As long as you have the right types of rock, the right structural preparation around that porphyry, you can have, pick your number of these big radiating deposits coming out from it. Hopefully that wasn't
Exciting,
too geeky
yeah,
there.
exciting stuff. So there could be some other stuff to find than just the porphyry. Um, could you comment a little bit? So Hermosa project was, I guess, confirmed earlier this year. It was kind of the first mining project that was ever added to the Fast 41 process, which is a federal permitting sort of process that I guess under the Biden administration for sort of fast tracking sort of critical metal, battery metal type deposits and resources and businesses. Can you comment at all on that?
Yeah, so Fast 41 is tying back into our permitting discussion earlier. It took us better part of 4.5 years to permit Sunnyside for exploration, right? And so if you want to get a mine in production in the States, it's going to take God knows how long if you're permitting on the U.S. forest. So Fast 41, what it does, from my understanding, and so everyone take this with a grain of salt because it's a geologist reading through, government files. What it does is it creates this new kind of oversight committee that is above the U.S. Forest Service, the Department of Agriculture. And so it takes a lot of the control on timing away from the Department of Ag, so that they are forced to adhere to timelines that are set by the oversight committee. So it really holds them to account. Whereas previous to this, the U.S. Forest Service, if you're in a forest or a region that are kind of underperformers, let's call them underperformers, there was no oversight. They could go as slow as they wanted, and unless you have the political ties to crack the whip and force them to move, they could sit on their hands, they could slow roll you, they could do whatever they wanted. Or they may not be the most competent folks in the building. And so you might get a product that is subpar, or there are gaps in the actual permit, the work that has to go into the permits, all sorts of different things. And so Fast 41, I think, is designed to ensure, or at least the premise is to ensure that these projects that are critically important, I think it's called Fast 41 because there are 41 minerals that are of strategic importance to the U.S., can move through the permitting process on a pace that is reasonable, that gets all of the science done, and ultimately you get to a decision quicker. And so that's South 32 has their Hermosa project in this program. It's fantastic from the standpoint that it should take some of the oversight and the timeframes, the control of that, out of the Forest Service's hands, and they're forced to kind of deal at a pace that is more reasonable. So hopefully that means that they can get, federal permits on their manganese portion of this deposit, as well as some ancillary things for their sulfide, lead zinc silver portion of the project through relatively quickly. But it's untested, so we'll see how it goes. Right at the end of the day, they're the guinea pigs. They're the first guys through the wall, and so I hope that it goes fantastically well for them.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like an exciting thing to be happening so close, I guess, closology with what you have going on.
Yeah, well, the cool thing is that most of their project is on state lands, patented mining claims, which are administered by the state of Arizona. So they're effectively building a mine next door without federal approvals. They don't need the federal approvals. So this is kind of an extra step on top of it that lets them kind of mine a separate portion of the same ore body, the oxidized portion, the near surface portion that's more manganese
right.
the economics stem from manganese more than, say, lead, zinc, silver. So it's kind of a nice bolt-on and added value proposition here. So it's great because they're going to keep pushing forward on the sulfide piece and hopefully have a mine up and running by 2027, I think is what their guidance is. And then they'll have this other kind of battery metal focused piece on top of it.
Wow, very interesting. We should probably continue to read up on that. Sounds like a world-class project right there, right close to you. Maybe the drill stick will be giving you some success, and we'll be talking about that too. So, in terms of switching the gears a little bit to that, when do you think your first assays would sort of be out? I know that there was a little bit of you got sort of drilling and it's just new. You just recently started drilling, so it's going to be a bit of time, I guess, to complete some holes and things like that. But are we thinking we're going to see some results here this year, or it'll be early next year?
Mm-hmm.
What's the timing for assays?
Yeah, it's the magical question everyone wants to know. Yeah, we should have some results this year. I mean, obviously, we have to hit some zones, and then we'll have results this year. So I think what we're going to do here is we'll release visual results first. So we should definitely have visual results out probably in November, and then obviously continuing into December. Assay results, I would suggest, would be December onward. And by visual results, what we expect to put out are just cross sections and kind of descriptions of the zones that we hit from a kind of a width standpoint. So no visuals, no estimating minerals, none of this cowboy stuff.
We're not going to gun it and say, oh, that's solid copper, solid silver.
No, and the last thing we're going to do is like say, our geologist estimated it's 20% chalcopyrite, and like we're not going to do any of that stuff because then those armchair quarterbacks that you talked about, those armchair geologists, will start coming up with their own grades, right?
Yeah,
they can wait for those. But what's important, I think, because these holes take a decent amount of time to drill, is that people see whether our model is living up to expectations, right? If we forecast to hit some zones here and they are here, or this thick versus this thick, that will give you some inferences as to how our geologic model is working. And you can kind of take that for what it is. And I think that's important for investors to see. But
we'll limit
the information.
Sure. Sounds like you'll be getting some geologists excited, so we'll be having to talk to them and ask them, what does this news release mean? But that's a good way to go about it. You mentioned something, you mentioned cross sections. Just in terms of some of our viewers, that's something I often like. From an investment point of view, it's kind of a must for me when companies are drilling, is you want to understand cross section. Could you maybe just briefly explain what that concept is and maybe the importance of it?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, a cross section is just taking a two-dimensional slice through the earth. So say this is my project. You're looking at a map, and my project is in here. What you're going to do is you're going to basically take a cut across it, and then you're going to flip that up, and then you'll see what the geology looks like in the earth, with this being the surface and this being, kind of down deep into the rocks. And so what it does is it allows you to kind of see how things are unfolding from a geologic standpoint. Think of it as a connect the dot exercise, right? So you're looking to kind of get that drill information and connect the dots. Is this mineralization continuous? How thick is the mineralization? What are the grades of the mineralization, quality type of things? And then from that, you can start to extrapolate. If I've got this length and I've got this thickness and I've got this depth, how many tons am I playing with? All those types of things. That's where the armchair geologists just go wild, right? Trying to come up with a resource before, you got the fourth hole out. So it's kind of fun. It's super addictive. But that's the utility in a cross section, is to see how the geologic concepts are kind of coming to fruition and how that model is fleshing out. So that way, the most important thing out of these drilling programs is how well is the real life situation correlating to what you projected, right? Because then that allows you to understand, is the rest of the program going to kind of give you results that you are expecting? And so that's
Yeah,
the
I guess
important thing to understand.
it can help a little bit on some of the smearing type effect as well, where again, that can be a little problematic, where somebody maybe have drilled into like a really high grade vein, but then they do carry enough of the mineral on subsequent meters, so they can extend it out over a broad interval and increase the average grade. So again, looking at cross section where they break it down on grade, you can kind of catch that and see how consistent or what type of what type of deposit it might end up being, and I guess keep some of these people a bit more honest. So that's why I find it to be interesting. And if a company doesn't want to put them out, I always wonder why.
Oh yeah, that's a giant red flag. And one of these days I should come on and we can actually get a piece of paper and I can draw on,
Yeah,
how to look at grades in drill holes and the intervals and angles and all that stuff to see what's important, what's not important, how people kind of can play with data. And yeah,
that would be
because
great. We're gonna take you up on that. I'd love to have you do a bit of that, because again, I think it's important. Usually we see it every couple of years when when like for example, we've had lithium. A lot of lithium companies have done really well, and so now everybody thinks they're an expert, and we don't even have to wait for the drill assays. They just need to know, like, how much spodumene has been hit and things like that. And I just think it can be a little problematic. So I do think that you always
hmm
have to like remain a bit conservative and
hmm
demand things like cross sections, so that you can really have a bit more data to kind of interpret whether something is good or just to promote. And there's a few promoters in our line of work. Anyways, that's great. Thank you very much for commenting on that. Maybe we could kind of touch on an important topic kind of that we face in the industry. Just with your own situation there, taking 4.5 years in order to get some drill permits for some exploration. Congrats on that. Maybe we can talk on some of the permitting challenges and kind of that you guys sort of like face specifically, and maybe just what you sort of did to sort of remain cool and calm, and again, you've had a remarkably supportive shareholder base for quite a while. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what's been successful for you and how you've been able to navigate that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think one of the key things that anyone looking to permit in the U.S. needs to understand is you should not be targeting investors that have short duration, kind of timeframes in their head, right? So where we have had some success is bringing in those types of shareholders that understand the permitting process and understand that it's going to take some time. The amount of time may be a bit of a question mark, but they understand that this is not a process that's going to play out over the next quarter, 2 quarters, 3 financial quarters. This is going to be something that takes years, right? And if you have those investors in, your life is so much easier because you ultimately want to sell each share one time in the market and not, continually flip those shares over and over and over again. So that's number one. Number two is that the company has to understand what they want to achieve out of this drilling program, and they have to understand the agency that they're working with. Because if you go into a U.S. Forest Service kind of jurisdiction, for example, and you understand the BLM kind of version of permitting, you could probably make some really easy mistakes that cost you a ton of time, right? Because ultimately what you want to do is understand what all the sensitivities are in your area and do all of the scientific work up front, or at least have it started, because you have to have kind of years worth of data to go into one of these permitting processes. So if you start flat-footed and you haven't started any surveys and you're submitting your application, it's going to take you a lot longer. So you really have to have kind of the right people in place. You have to have the right investors in place, and you have to have reasonable expectations on time frame. Those are the three key things that you need, and preferably you should have a private company. If it's just a single asset, Barksdale probably should have been private for, if we had to look in hindsight, Barksdale should have probably been private until, this past year, from the standpoint that most public investors obviously some savvy ones are in there, and I hope that I can make them a ton of money. But most of the public market investors are kind of quick flip folks, and they're looking to kind of get in and out of something on a kind of 6-month basis, right? So those are the things you have to watch out for with permitting.
Excellent. Thank you for taking us over that. Nice overview. In terms of a little bit, maybe we could talk a bit more about kind of the evolving landscape of permitting in the modern mining sort of industry. There's all this discussion about if we're going to continue to sort of decarbonize our economy, get into electrification, further reduce our reliance upon internal combustion engines and things like that. We're going to need a lot more metals, and mining is going to obviously be very critical for that sort of future. In terms of that, are you sort of seeing a bit of an evolving landscape? Anything you can sort of pass along about the permitting process?
Yeah. So look, the demand for metals is only going up, right? I think just broadly across the board. And obviously, a good component of that growth are some of these kind of new segments of the market, the energy transition, so to speak. So look, those are very important. At the end of the day, people are always going to be NIMBYs, right? Not in my backyard. And so you just have to be cognizant from a permitting and an operating standpoint that you go into an area and you're a bit compassionate and understanding with the locals, and you are very transparent and explain what you want to do, how you're going to do it, and how it could affect them. Those are the key things from a permitting standpoint. You're never going to change the minds of folks that are anti-mining or anti, kind of industrialization, right? But what you can do ultimately is make them comfortable with you as a person or you as a company, that you do what you say you're going to do. You are transparent, and that you take, them seriously. And that's the most important thing, because if they can be comfortable with you, it's a win, right? If it's just not like daggers all the time, everyone out for each other. Those are the key things from a permitting standpoint. And then people just have to not be bashful about trying to permit projects in place where they think that, folks are going to be against them, because that's probably the best place to get a permit. If there was ever value to be added to a project or a company, it's to get a permit where people did not expect you to be able to get a permit, right? That's a huge barrier to entry. And that's where you can make a lot of money at the end of the day, right? So you got to look at every potential risk as an opportunity as well.
Have you done a lot to like sort of engage the local community? Would you say that's kind of an important process? Is when you say NIMBY is not my backyard, I would imagine that really engaging the community would be job one. Any comment on that in terms of some of the stuff you've been involved with previously, or even now with Sunnyside?
Yeah, look, we've always had an open door policy. So right at the beginning, we sat down with some of the environmental groups that were opposed to what we were, looking to accomplish, and told them that there's an open door. Like if you have a proposal for us that would make the program better, the effects, to be reduced, or any of those types of things, come and tell us. And we will work with you to try to get that resolved. We've always had that open door policy with the public as well as these organizations. And I think that's the best thing that you can do. If you're holding events constantly in a community, trying to tell everyone that you're the best thing since sliced bread, but you're not, kind of giving them the mechanisms to talk to you and to tell you what they think, it's not gonna bode well. Again, you shouldn't focus on trying to change people's minds. You should just focus on giving them the avenues to express themselves and tell you about what they want out of this whole thing. And if they just want you to go away, well, they can go pound sand. You're not gonna change those folks' opinions. But if you're an a-hole about it, you're going to get uproar in the community, and those folks will have, something to come after you with. So be nice, be transparent, and you'll get the job done.
Excellent. There's been a little bit of discussion here recently. I've heard a bit about the difference between like open pit and underground. A lot of people, when they're coming to like raise capital and there's any opposition to permitting, you're like, oh, well, don't worry, it's going to be an underground operation. I would imagine that there's quite a bit of benefit for looking at an underground. You have less ground disturbance at the surface and things like that. When you're flying over it, it doesn't look like a big hole in the ground. But any sort, is there any relevance there, or
Oh,
is
yeah.
some of that just people trying to position something to reduce some of the pushback that they might be getting?
Both. And this is one of those examples where, if you asked the public in an area what they would prefer, an underground mine that has a smaller footprint and they would kind of see less of it versus a big open pit that would have more jobs and, have more economic output, they're going to almost always go for that smaller sized footprint that has less obvious, kind of visual effects. And so that's one of those scenarios where if you have the high grade, you have to have high grade to kind of support the economics of going underground. It's a better option from a getting things done perspective, right? With communities permitting, all of those types of things, because you're just operating with such a smaller footprint. And you oftentimes, you can put most of your waste back underground and things of that nature. So it's a better way to go. It's not easy. It's never easy, but there's fewer roadblocks there, right? And in the case of our district, most of what we're looking at least the neighbors, they're planning everything underground, and everything that we're targeting. Well, I'm certainly not going to say it's open pittable, because we're looking at things that are thousands of feet deep. But for instance, on Sunnyside, there's a huge chalcocite blanket on that project that's relatively shallow copper mineralization, and it could very well be something that would work from an open pit standpoint, big copper open pit. But that's not what we're kind of targeting. That's not the focus of our programs. That's certainly not what we're not going to push in the community, because I don't think that's what anyone wants to see. So, you got to know your audience, and you've got to focus on what can bring the most value to your company. And so for us, it certainly is the deeper, higher grade, underground style mineralization.
Excellent. Thanks for answering that. Maybe we'll sort of wrap things up here. Let's circle back to Barksdale. You mentioned a bit, I thought it was a very good comment, by the way. I want to sell my shares once. Maybe you could speak to sort of the cap table of Barksdale. What does it look like? How many shares are out? And maybe the general percentages that would be owned by management, insiders, institutions, strategics, things like that.
Yeah, so I think we have 81 million shares more or less outstanding. You can think of Barksdale in kind of three buckets. So we have roughly 25% corporate. So those would be companies like, Tech Resources. We have roughly 25, maybe 20 to 25% in kind of funds. So groups that, kind of mutual funds and such, hedge
Institution.
funds.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's kind of 25% more or less high net worth folks. So guys that have, an incredible amount of wealth, and they're not generally, kind of churning their investments too frequently. So from a kind of sell your share one standpoint, Barksdale's pretty good proposition, because I can call most of my shareholders, the vast majority of the shares, at least, with a couple of dozen phone calls. Management and the board of directors at Barksdale have kind of 5.5–6% of the stock. I have 1.4 million shares, a little over 1.4. And other than some options exercises, I've bought all my stock on market. So, I've got a cost base that is probably in the 40-cent range, 39 cents, 40 cents. And so, look, I'm looking to make a bunch of money off of Barksdale. Quite honestly, that's the whole goal of running a company that's publicly traded, is to make money off of the equity that I hope to one day sell. So that's the name of the game. And so for my shareholders, I try to take care of them, because taking care of them is taking care of me at the end of the day. And again, I only want to sell a share once. So I don't like to put those shares, if we do financings, in the hands of folks that I know are going to be sellers. That's not the preference. That's not where we want to go, because you're just kicking the can down the road. You're creating another problem that you're going to have to fix down the road. So we've been pretty selective in who we hand our shares out to. At least we have in the past. So.
Hey, excellent. Well, I would imagine that that's pretty significant institutional and corporate ownership. So congratulations on that, for a company that's fairly early stage in terms of historic drilling. data. Very impressive. I imagine that would have something to do with your management team and your board's track record. So good stuff. Maybe we could. Well, I ask everybody this: what's a typical day look like for you? Maybe you could give a bit of a breakdown for people. What's a day kind of look like in your life?
Yeah, so look, if I'm on the road, I'm either slammed in meetings all day, or I'm down at site and I'm kind of checking in the progress of the program and meeting with stakeholders and things like that. When I'm in the office, usually I would say probably 20 to 30% of the day is talking to investors. Another 20-30% of the day is talking to the employees and making sure everything's working smoothly. I've got some, market checkup time, so to speak. Um, Going over strategy, writing press releases, dealing with the board of directors, financials, paying bills, all those types of things. So I would say, it's just depends on the seat I'm sitting in at that point in time, right? And where I like to be is out on the road, telling the story and kind of putting those thoughts into the heads of folks that are investing out there.
You just did a bit of marketing, if I'm not mistaken. You're in Toronto there with Terry Ann.
Yep.
How what was the reception like there? I know obviously it's been a bit of a harder market for resource mining stocks. We're all waiting for the Fed to be done with interest rates and perhaps pivot and things like that. It's definitely been sort of a bit problematic, although commodity prices are looking really strong. Um, what was the mood like? How'd you find that? Was it different than anything you'd done before, or was it to get some good audiences?
Yeah, we had some really great meetings. Like the benefit of marketing in a bad market is that there's not a lot of folks out there doing it, and so your voice tends to be louder in kind of these meetings, right? So, for instance, we went out with one of the banks that covers us on the research side and took a lot of meetings. We had a completely jammed day plus overflow meetings on two separate additional days. They hadn't had a mining or exploration company with that amount of traction in 6 months. So it just tells you if you bang your drum in a dark market, people will pay attention, especially if you have something interesting and new that you're bringing to the market, right? And we certainly do. We've always been a permitting story. We never really marketed to funds that aren't interested in permitting, or high net worth folks that aren't interested in permitting, right? So we have a new broader audience that we can go after right now, and so we are going to spend a lot of time marketing, because why not? Other people aren't doing it, and that's going to be an advantage.
Hey, good stuff. Great. Maybe you could leave us with what are the top 5 reasons to consider investing in Barksdale today?
Yeah. Well, I got to use my fingers so I can keep this to 5. Look, we've got 2 drills turning, and we've got really big targets, right? We're not shooting for mediocrity. We're shooting for high grade mineralization that's impactful, and that's the biggest and best reasons. The second is you'll be fully aligned with a management team that is adding to their positions in the market and through option exercises, and we are out to make ourselves a bunch of money, and we only do that if our shareholders make money. The third is we're in a fantastic district style opportunity, and it's not often that you get a junior that has a land position such as ours in a district that is as hot as ours. Um, that's just a recipe for success, in my opinion, and in my previous investment history. Fourth, we're in a locality that makes sense. We're in the United States. We're a Canadian company in the United States. I'm an American. There's rule of law in the United States. Is unbearable as it is from permitting and slow kind of reaction times. There's rule of law there. This isn't, say Panama, which is quite typical, or
Yes,
topical right now,
topical right now.
where
Yes.
you can lose your entire project, right? That just can't happen in the States, and that's comforting at the end of the day. And then fifth, it's a world
Sounds
class.
like a tight cap table you got, right?
Yeah, the cap table is fantastic. We have a world class, district with world class assets. Like there's a lot more reasons here, but the biggest and best one is that we're drilling an exciting project, and we should have results out this year. So this isn't one of those stocks that you're going to sneak in after we get assays, good assays anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of people really waiting on those. So if they're good, I would imagine it's a massive re-rate. Very impressive that yeah, fingers, everything's crossed. I'm a shareholder, so wish you good success there. It's not very often that a company that has doesn't have a resource and has, I guess has one historic or very few sort of historic drill holes, that you'd have research coverage. So that's
Mhm.
good on you. Again, would probably show the strategic nature of where you're located, and Arizona mining obviously was a story that made a lot of people a lot of money in our business. So being right next door is I'm great. So congrats on that. Any final thoughts you kind of want to leave us with?
Yeah, I think the last thought I want to say is, one, buy some bro, and then two, if you have any questions as shareholders, again, transparency being the key thing, reach out, ask your questions. We will answer them. Our contact information is on the website. You can even sign up for meetings on the website, and you'll get Terry Ann and or myself, um, and we'll get your questions answered. So don't be bashful. Reach out.
Excellent. Maybe you could just mention a little bit on Terry Ann. We've mentioned her name a couple of times, but we haven't really brought her up. That's the way that we've connected. Maybe you could just explain who she is with the company.
Yeah, she's our VP of communications. She's terrific. She's a pit bull. She has bought a bunch of stock in Barksdale and is fully committed to kind of pushing us forward and making sure that we're successful. So, her job is to go out and kind of communicate our story and bang the drum, if you will. And boy, does she bang the drum. So she's very good at what she does, and she is very passionate about Barksdale. So, a fantastic employee to have.
Yeah, excellent. I've known her for years, and she tends to only put her name on stuff that does well. So I've done well investing alongside Terry Ann before. So we hope that's continues to be the case here. Looks like you had an excellent project and some excellent shareholders and great management in yourself and your team. So good stuff. Hey, Rick, thanks very much for spending some time with us. I know we've taken a bit more than what we sort of scheduled. Hopefully we can have you back when you got some drill assays out, and we can sort of keep our viewers kind of updated on what's going on. And I really appreciate you giving a little bit of education on both permitting and cross sections, and we'll take you up on a few more educational topics in the future. But thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure being here. Happy to come back anytime.
Thank you.